Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of Bitcoin. You've probably heard it everywhere by now, right? From friends who swear they're making a killing to those financial news segments that just leave you with more questions than answers. But here's the thing. Beneath all the hype and the jargon, Bitcoin represents a really radical idea. A world without banks, no credit cards, none of those middlemen we've just come to accept as part of how things work. Imagine that for a second. Total control over your money. That's the vision laid out in Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin Whitepaper. And today we're going to try to unpack it. And to help us make sense of it all, we've got our resident expert on all things tech and finance. How are we doing today?
Doing well, thanks. It's always exciting to revisit this white paper. It's like a window into a potential future of finance. And it all starts with understanding the problems that Bitcoin is trying to solve at a fundamental level.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of the matter. What are these problems and why should we even care?
Well, at its core, Bitcoin tries to address two major issues. First, the double spending dilemma. How do you prevent someone from spending the same digital money twice? Think of it like making a copy of a digital file. It's easy to duplicate. Traditional systems solve this by relying on those central authorities, like banks, to verify transactions and prevent this kind of fraud.
So like needing my bank to approve every online purchase, making sure I'm not buying a new pair of shoes with the same digital dollar I just used to buy coffee.
Exactly. But this dependence on third parties leads us to the second and perhaps bigger issue, the need for trustless transactions. See, when you use banks or credit cards, you're inherently placing trust in these institutions. And, this reliance isn't ideal, as we've seen with all the instances of fraud, and then there's those pesky fees, and even situations of censorship.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to those frustrating banking experiences. Sometimes it feels like they're holding our money hostage with all the fine print and regulations. So Bitcoin wants to cut out the middleman entirely. But how do you actually build trust into a system where there's no one really in charge?
That's where it gets really fascinating. Bitcoin's solution is kind of elegant in its simplicity. A decentralized network that's built on cryptography and proof of work. Now, I know those are buzzwords, but bear with me. Cryptography, at its most basic level, uses math to secure information, like a super secret code that makes transactions tamper-proof.
Okay, so we're talking about building trust into the system itself, not relying on some outside authority. And proof of work, that's the engine that makes this whole thing run.
Exactly. It's the revolutionary concept that really sets Bitcoin apart. Imagine instead of a bank verifying transactions, you have this network of computers all doing the work, each one competing to solve these complex mathematical problems. And this isn't just some arbitrary puzzle. This process known as mining is what verifies and adds new transactions to the blockchain.
Okay, so we're talking about a network of computers competing to solve math problems. It's like a digital gold rush or something. But how does that actually secure anything?
Well, that's the beauty of it. These math problems are incredibly difficult and time-consuming to solve. They require a ton of computing power. This means it's not easy or cheap to cheat the system. Think of it like this. To tamper with a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, you wouldn't just have to outsmart one computer, you'd have to outsmart the entire network. All those computers working simultaneously to try to verify those transactions.
So it's like trying to rob Fort Knox, but instead of walls and guards, it's protected by a massive army of math equations.
Exactly. And now let's talk about the blockchain. Remember that public ledger we mentioned? That's where all these verified transactions get recorded. Imagine a giant unchangeable spreadsheet, and it's duplicated across thousands of computers. Each block in this chain represents a set of transactions, and once a block is added to the chain, it's virtually impossible to alter.
Okay, so the miners are all competing to solve these puzzles. The winner gets to add the next block of transactions to the blockchain. But what's stopping them from teaming up? Like controlling the majority of the network's computing power and just rewriting the rules in their favor.
Yeah, it's a critical question, and it gets to the heart of why Bitcoin is often called decentralized. The network is designed to make it incredibly difficult for any one entity to gain a controlling share of the computing power. Plus, there's a built-in incentive to play fair.
Incentive? What do they get for all this computational heavy lifting?
Well, remember how new Bitcoins are created. The miner who solves the puzzle first gets rewarded with a certain amount of Bitcoin. It's like a prize for their effort. It's how new coins are introduced into circulation. This reward, combined with the cost of the computing power itself, it creates an incentive for miners to act honestly. It's more profitable to play by the rules than try to game the system.
So it's like a self-regulating system. The more people who join the network and try to mine Bitcoin, the harder the puzzles get, and the more secure the whole system becomes.
Precisely. This mechanism is called difficulty adjustment, and it ensures that blocks are added to the blockchain at a consistent rate, roughly every 10 minutes, regardless of how much computing power is online.
That's really interesting. This is all starting to click now, but let's maybe shift gears for a moment and talk about the elephant in the room. This whole process, this proof of work, it sounds incredibly energy intensive. I mean, is Bitcoin bad for the environment?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's definitely a topic of ongoing debate within the Bitcoin community. It's true that mining requires a significant amount of energy, but it's important to put that into context. The traditional financial system, with its sprawling infrastructure of banks and data centers and global transactions, it also consumes an enormous amount of energy.
So it's not a simple black and white issue.
Right. Plus, many argue that Bitcoin incentivizes the development of renewable energy sources. Miners are constantly seeking the cheapest and most efficient sources of electricity, and that often leads them to solar, wind, and hydropower.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've covered the problem, the solution, and some of the complexities. But what does this all mean? What are the real-world implications of this technology? What makes Bitcoin truly revolutionary?
Well, the implications are vast and far-reaching. But at its core, Bitcoin represents a really fundamental shift in how we think about trust, security, and the exchange of value.
All right, so we've gone pretty deep into the tech here. I think it's time to zoom out a little and look at the bigger picture. What are the key features that make Bitcoin so different from using like a regular app, to send some money to a friend?
One word: decentralization. This is really at the heart of what makes Bitcoin so revolutionary. It's not controlled by any single entity, not a government, not a bank, not even a tech company. It's distributed across this global network of computers, meaning there's no single point of failure.
So no more worrying about a bank just like freezing your account or a government manipulating currency values. That sounds incredibly empowering.
Exactly. It puts the power back in the hands of individuals. But decentralization isn't just about freedom from those traditional institutions. It's also about security.
Hold on. I thought we already covered the security part with the whole, math problems in the blockchain.
We did. But decentralization adds another layer of protection. Because the blockchain is spread across those thousands of computers, it's virtually impossible for any one entity to compromise the system. To tamper with a transaction, you'd have to rewrite the entire history of the blockchain across all those computers. It's like trying to fight a hydra. You cut off one head and two more grow back.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. Decentralization equals resilience. No single point of failure means way greater security. But what about privacy? Earlier we talked about the blockchain being like a public ledger. Doesn't that mean everyone can just see my transactions?
Well, that's a common misconception. While it's true that all transactions are publicly viewable on the blockchain, they're not directly tied to your real-world identity. Think of it like using cash. You can see the money changing hands, but you don't necessarily know who's involved in that transaction.
Right, you just see that someone bought something from someone else. Anonymity is key when it comes to privacy. Okay, so we've got decentralization, security, and a degree of anonymity. Anything else?
Don't forget about the limited supply. Unlike traditional currencies, which can be printed endlessly by governments, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. It's built-in scarcity. It's written into the code, making it a truly finite resource.
Wait, so if there's a limited supply, doesn't that mean the value is entirely speculative? What's stopping it from becoming a digital Beanie Baby craze?
That's a great question. And it's something that even, seasoned economists debate to this day. Part of Bitcoin's value comes from its utility as a decentralized, secure form of money. But there's also an element of perceived value, similar to gold. It's that scarcity combined with its growing adoption and use cases that contributes to its market price.
So it's a really complex mix of factors. Okay, maybe last question before we wrap up here. Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin, vanished without a trace after releasing the white paper. Do we know why?
That's one of the greatest mysteries in the tech world. No one knows for sure who Satoshi Nakamoto is, or why they chose to remain anonymous. Some speculate that it was to protect their identity, while others believe it was to ensure that Bitcoin remained a truly decentralized project, free from any single leader or figurehead.
Wow, talk about a mic drop. So is Bitcoin the future of finance? I guess that's a question for each of us to decide for ourselves, huh?
Absolutely. The best way to understand it is to dive in, learn more, and see how this technology continues to evolve. But one thing's for sure, it's definitely sparked a global conversation. about the nature of money, trust, and the future of her financial systems.
And that's the beauty of the deep dive. We equip you with the knowledge to ask the right questions and explore these complex topics. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Bitcoin. And as always, keep those thinking caps on.